نعود مع أعمال.
Now we come to the first panel, fourth generation warfare, exploring the changing face of war. And I leave you with the panel chair, Ali Sabih Al-Ka'bi, Customs Commission, Head of the Federal Customs Authority, United Arab Emirates. Microphone, please, Mr. Ali. In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate, Your Highness Sheikh Mohamed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Chairman of the Day1 Affairs, the Court of His Highness Sheikh Mohamed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Abu Dhabi Crown Prince, Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of UAE. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me, first of all, to extend my gratitude and appreciation to ECSSR, and headed by Dr. Jamal Sanad Swedi, the Director General, for the generous invitation to take part in this conference. And I welcome my colleagues, Dr. Rod Thornton and Dr. Thomas X. Hams, for participating in our own session. Allow me to give you an insight about the previous generations of warfare, just to remind you, not to discuss it, focusing on the fourth generation warfare. In the past, we thought that wars were as follows. There would be kind of reports, there would be modern aircraft, advanced weaponry, high technologies, and different kinds of weapons, but the world was surprised by the following picture. The contrary or the opposite took place. We have noticed, and the mankind noticed, that warfare took another direction. Instead of our own expectations of the previous image, a new image is completely different. That is the image of terror, the image of beheading, the image of devastation, new tactics, and new types of wars that were completely unexpected and unpredicted. Now let me remind you of the previous generations of warfare, starting with R1GW, which continued for more than 3,000 years until 1860, started with simple weapons and even primitive weapons, and then direct confrontation, close confrontation with direct fires, limited fronts, and the tactics of the frontline combat, and then a kind of a command and control, central command and control, run in a pyramidic style. It was state against state, with civil wars, of course, and the objects and the targets of wars were clear, and the results were direct, either victory or defeat. That was the first generation. As for the second generation, which appeared during and after the First World War, that consisted of the clear frontline patterns, the use of comprehensive fire, including the artillery or indirect artillery, that was very close to the front lines, and direct confrontations between the two forces with the slow movement of the forces. They didn't have the ability to move quickly in order to maneuver. and there was a complete bias to the state, and the state or the government controlled all resources, putting them in the service of warfare, and it was a state against state up to this stage. In fact, as for the third generation of wars, which started after the First World War and took about 7 decades, almost 7 decades, was characterized by a quick initiative, and they will have also the armed world and tanks and separate air force that was different from the combined forces. Now we have a new feature that is the defense in depth, and that was also one state against one state or allies. Also the introduction of the WMDs, and also a battle on the whole stage of operations due to the introduction of the progress in machinery, and also a new concept of the combined maneuver and the show-off of force, and then the electronic warfare, which started with the third generation. As for the asymmetric warfare or the fourth generation warfare, this is the generation we are talking about, which appeared for the first time, as my colleague mentioned, in the US research and studies during the 80s of the 20th century. And the features or the characteristics of the 4GW: first, the pivotal ideas and ideologies, and the culture is the target, and they center around the destruction of the cultural, spiritual values, moral values of the enemy. The second is the complicated nature of war. They are non-traditional wars, and they do not have specific timelines, and it is difficult to build a kind of preventive, defensive, strong walls at the ideological and intellectual levels, and the heavy reliance on moral and media and psychological warfare, and the open place of combating and interactions center around moral and psychological influence, including also the media. The fourth is the political, security and economic access, and the success of such warfare requires the presence of many factors at the political, economic, security and military levels, so that they could change the plans of cultural devastation, and the new advanced patterns of interactions, mutiny, protest, and being trained through international organizations to use certain individuals and groups and communities to enhance the internal change within that targeted country. And this scope shows the long-term planning in such a kind of warfare. It can be said that the fourth generation is a kind of a combined conventional and non-conventional patterns, and it is the shortest cut towards the future warfare. So it is the foundation of the forthcoming generations. In fact, that is the hybrid warfare. The hybrid warfare, as it was described, including systematic military forces and asystematic special forces, support of internal chaos, psychological and media warfare, cyber warfare also, and economic warfare, outer space warfare, diplomacy, and the possibility of a surprise by introduction new elements and new weaponry at a certain stage of that war. So this is the hybrid warfare and its own constituents. Now we have also the electronic warfare, as the Secretary General said, and this electronic or cyber warfare includes the intelligence, deterrence, political pressure, blackmailing, proving of the capacities, and the disintegration of the decision-making networks, and the destruction of the community or social confidence and trust. As for the tactic is the other change is tactic, and in the fourth generation, the tactic of rebellion, terror, and guerrilla warfares came under the title of the management of war and direct attack on the culture and morale of the enemy, and distortion or the delegitimization of the state. Also, use of malicious activities against the communities by more than the state itself, and the use of education and media to support the revenues, and also the arrangement of psychological operations, including terror and creation of chaos through complicated psychological methods, and misleading through media, the use of civilians to create tactical crises, and use innovative ways, and also high specialization to confidentiality, and to change the power of the enemy against the state through military mutiny, for example, or civil mutiny. In the fourth generation, new actors appeared, not a state against state or an army against an army, no, but the new actors, in fact, in this warfare, and beyond even the warfare, the new actors will be completely different. The number will be less or more, but the new actors included the intellectual and radical and extremist and fundamentalist groups, the mercenaries, and the mercenaries were there in the past, but under the umbrella of the states, and as it happened in the international COPs in some European countries, and the ethnic and groups and minorities. There's a new factor in the fourth generation, and the organized crime and the countries that support the terrorist groups, and these are the financiers of those countries for the economic destruction of these nations, and they are run from distance, and multinational companies that work under a certain umbrella in some nations, and the NGOs and non-profit organizations, and they play a negative part sometimes in certain communities, and supporting some of the terrorist groups in different methods and ways. These new actors may include all these organizations that will take part in the fourth generation. Now I stop here, and I'll open the floor to Dr. Thomas Hams from Distinguished Research, and the floor is yours. Please, you can talk about the theory of fourth generation warfare. Please, the floor is yours.
Your Highness, Your Excellencies, honored guests. First, I'd like to thank ECSSR for the kind invitation to come here and a wonderful hospitality. I'm honored to be speaking with such a distinguished group of professionals and look forward to the conversation over the next couple of days. From this morning, it's pretty clear that the professionals here have a very strong understanding of fourth generation warfare. So I will not spend a great deal of time on the theory, but instead a little bit on the history of how it developed in the United States and why, and then where I think it's going. Oops. I have to give a disclaimer. These are my personal views, not those of the United States government or the Pentagon. Fourth generation was introduced, and I think the first time the term was used was in 1989 in an article called The Changing Face of War in the Marine Corps Gazette by Bill Lind and co-authors. The key thing to remember, the Marine Corps Gazette tends to be a very practical journal. It is for practitioners. It is not for theoreticians or for historians. The key question was, warfare is changing, but how? We kind of had a dim understanding that warfare was changing. Bill Lind and his co-authors developed the concept of generations of war based on the generations or the tactics that changed in response to changes in technology. Now, they understood that warfare did not start in modern times, but they said they would only talk to modern times because they thought it would apply for the practical people that were going to have to execute this, in other words, the Marines in the field. They ended their article by challenging Marines to come up with their own idea of what fourth generation would be. They provided a couple proposals, and I responded several years later. It took a couple years because I was in operational forces and therefore very, very busy, with a short article called The Evolution of War, the Fourth Generation. I built on the Lind article, but I disagreed with his history in that article, and I'll explain that briefly. And then in 2004, I expanded it to the Sling and the Stone, the full-length book. And again, my focus was practical, not theoretical. The key thing I had with Mr. Lind and his authors was a historical disagreement. I do not think warfare is defined by tactics or technology. It evolves from the political, economic, and social conditions of the entities in conflict. When one state fights another, or one insurgent group fights another, whatever the groups are that are fighting, they can only fight according to their political, economic, and social structures, and that's why warfare changes. The technology is applied as it can be used under those organizations. Changes in generations take decades, and they usually only become clear in hindsight. For instance, as we moved from first to second generation will peak in World War II, but you can first see it very clearly in the United States in 1863 in our Civil War. We have trenches, barbed wire, machine guns, aerial observation, rapid-firing cannon, rapid-firing muskets, and we even get to repeating rifles before that war is over. So everything you will see come to a peak in 1914, 15, 16 is already present in 1863. Now, why did I choose to use a fourth generation model? Well, the problem was, again, a practical problem. We wanted to change the discussion. In the 1990s, as a result of Operation Desert Storm, the US Pentagon was absolutely convinced high technology was the answer to every possible problem. And therefore, they focused on technology. It got worse post-2001 when we became involved in Afghanistan and Iraq, because despite the fact we were involved fighting two insurgencies, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld banned the use of the term insurgency inside the Pentagon. So those of us who are trying to get the United States military to change and understand this is a very different fight, we're looking for a route. I chose fourth generation because you couldn't talk about insurgency. Also, Americans are fascinated with new stuff. We don't like history much. We like new stuff. So if you talk about insurgency, it's just old stuff and nobody would publish you. If you talk about fourth generation warfare, this is something new. So essentially, it was a sneaky way to get in the conversation. I started with Mao because I don't think he's the first guerrilla, obviously not. When you read War in the Shadows, it goes back a very long time, to essentially the beginning of human history. But he was the first who wrote about it as political primacy. He was not the first to use it. Michael Collins led the Irish Revolution with political primacy, thinking he would win politically rather than militarily. But the Irish being Irish, they killed Mr. Collins before he could write it down, and therefore he never wrote it down. Mao did. I also picked Mao because he was the most influential. Remember, I'm talking to an audience that is reading reports from insurgents, classified reports from insurgencies around the world. And one book that shows up every time we overrun one of their camps is Mao on insurgency. It doesn't mean they were following it. Very often they weren't, because they didn't have the right political, social, and economic conditions. But the other thing is post-World War II insurgency is what I focused on, because the first time it brings expeditionary counterinsurgency, where a power goes overseas and is not the ruling power. It is not the government. And that's a very, very different problem. And it provides examples of those to show the evolution. Now, this is the problem. This is what DoD envisioned just after the Gulf War, network-centric warfare. And you look, and all the systems are very well connected. It's a big network. The only people on the battlefield, if you look way over there in the left-hand corner, that Special Operations Force team, are the only people. And no one is talking to them. The Pentagon thought you could fight a war without people. And of course, what we got was Iraq and Afghanistan proved to us that was not true at all. So this was my definition of fourth generation. I said it was insurgency evolved. Again, I was trying to get us to the conversation about insurgency. It's a direct attack on the minds of the decision makers. Again, I'm talking about expeditionary coins. What I have to do is defeat the outside power so I can get on with defeating the inside power. all available networks, political, economic, social, and military, and it's pretty clear from the previous speakers, there's a clear understanding of that use of networks here. Superior political will defeats greater economic military power, and wars are measured in decades. They are not short conflicts. And I think that's the refreshing thing here is you're obviously way ahead of where the United States was when we started this conversation. These wars will be political, protracted, networked, and they will coexist with other generations. If you do not have the culture or structure to fight this generation, you may fight an earlier generation or a different way to fight. Now, what's the biggest issue I missed? The biggest issue I missed, again, I was talking to Americans, so I assumed we understood we were talking about expeditionary counterinsurgency because we weren't going to fight the Indians again in the United States. So everything we do would be overseas. The problem is I didn't make it clear because domestic counterinsurgency, good governance is the goal. Good governance defeats the insurgents. And if you are the domestic power, you control the government and therefore can make the changes. And that's the source of our FM 324 counterinsurgency. The problem is the lessons come out of Malaya, North Ireland, Algeria, all places where the colonial power was the ruling power. If there was a problem with the government, they could change it. We did expeditionary, where we don't control the government. So for instance, in Afghanistan during a period, they were trying to move a governor. He was corrupt, they felt he was bad. It took 2 years, the personal intervention of the British Prime Minister, and they moved the governor to the province next door, which did little to improve the governance. So you can't use the same approach in expeditionary as you do in domestic. It fails if it's direct and large. We saw that in Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan twice, once the Soviets and us this time. If you go in and try to govern and fight for them, you lose leverage. The successes the United States has had have been basically small counterinsurgencies. The Philippines in 1950 and through the 2000s, Thailand, Colombia, and El Salvador, all very small. Most people have never heard of them because they were kept small and advisory, and therefore they worked. Fourth generation will continue to evolve in these areas. There will be strategic shifts, organizational shifts. Who participates changes, and the weapons that be employed will change. The biggest strategic shift is from the insurgents' point of view, it is not a military campaign. As previous speakers have noted, it will be an effort by to destroy the political will. It's a strategic communications campaign, and it works from local to international levels. There was a very good discussion of that. Identity is much more important. There are multiple forms of identity depending upon the societies that are involved in the conflict. Operational shift, coalitions of angry and opportunistic. One of our problems is when we started looking at insurgency, we looked at Mao. And Mao comes from a Confucian society, so very hierarchical. The first thing Mao and Ho did was get control of their insurgency. They wiped out anybody who didn't agree with them and made it a very hierarchical insurgency. That does not work in Afghanistan, Chechnya, Iraq, because the societies are not organized that way, and therefore you cannot fight that way. Greater fragmentation, smaller elements, they will often hate each other. Back in the 1980s when insurgents were good guys, I was working with the Afghans. And one of our biggest problems was keeping the Afghans from fighting each other, because very often they were just happy to fight each other as they were to fight the Russians. It will be transdimensional. They'll identify, recruit, indoctrinate, train, deploy, and control via the internet. So the dimension they've crossed is from the real world to the internet. When the Al-Qaeda was driven out of Afghanistan in late 2001, by early 2002, they'd published a new strategy. They published it online. It was the first time actually my work had been widely quoted. They said the strategy will be, we will destroy you using fourth generation warfare, and then quoted a significant part of my '94 article. It was good somebody was reading my stuff. It was unfortunate it was them. Now the participants will change too. The clans, the tribes, are an early form of security. If a nation state starts to break down, you have to turn to an earlier form of security, a form that will protect you regardless of anything else because you identify with them. We've had discussions about the transnational nature and subnational nature of the movements. They'll be ethnic and religious. We have not discussed enough how criminals will participate as an opportunity to make money and to move things, and how sometimes both the state and the insurgent will be involved in criminal activity, as we see in Afghanistan, and then often it's the nation-state actors, the Russians, the United States, the various states from outside that will play. The weapons will range from off-the-shelf, AK-47 is ubiquitous, the RPG-7, improvised explosive devices, missiles, and drones are going to come on fairly quickly. There'll be increasing sophistication, a mix of high and low. The basic insurgent or terrorists will use cheap weapons, cheap IEDs, AK-47s, but there will be increasingly use of missiles and drones. There will be practical use of weapons of mass destruction. Now, it is very, very difficult to bring enough chemicals to make a major attack. It's hard to create them, it's hard to move them. It is easier to detonate the supply another society already provides. Every society has chemical plants, every society has large stocks of explosives in the forms of fuel or fertilizer, and if you use those, just bring the detonator and you can make good results. I'll show a slide of that later. Insurgent goals evolve. Initially after World War II, the goal obviously was to get rid of colonial powers. That worked. The next goal was to determine who would rule within the old boundaries. That's Fopla versus UNITA in Angola, a 20-year fight. But at the end of that fight, Angola is still the same shape. What we see now is an effort to redraw the boundaries, which may move it, and this is, I think, a significant point, from insurgency to state formation. Previous speakers have mentioned Sudan, Somalia, Yugoslavia, Iraq, Syria, the Baluch and Pashtuns. These are all part of states that were formed by outside colonial powers. They did not form internally from their own organization, but were forced on them outside. As a result, they may now be moving into the state formation period. What makes this particularly difficult, it's a very long process. If you look at European history, about 400 to 700 years to move fully through the state formation process. And each path was unique. As you study the nations of Europe, each path is unique. So converging technology is the other thing I want to talk about that's very worrying. As technology converges, it's creating greater and greater power and making it available to smaller entities. That's good news for small states, but it's also bad news because terrorists and insurgent groups can use this too. For instance, the Switchblade. This is a U.S. Marine Corps project. You can see how small it is. This was developed 3 or 4 years ago. You fire it in the air. It has a GPS navigation system, a color camera. It'll go out about 10 kilometers, spend about 10 minutes on station. The Marines, being Marines, put a 40-millimeter grenade in the nose, so when you're done flying, you can fly into something and destroy it. Costs about $15,000. What's happening, though, is the commercial world is using these. This was created about the same time. You'll notice the range is 40 kilometers. The time of operation is 2 to 3 hours. The cost is about half. The people who are using it are wedding planners and wedding photographers, realtors to show property, and background roll for movies. So anybody is using these. In the United States last year, we sold 15 million small drones. Don't think it's just small drones. Aravel sells this flex rotor. It was designed to look for fish and to patrol maritime zones, 3,400 kilometer range. It's autonomous. It launches itself from a small platform, flies for 40 hours or 3,400 kilometers, depending on how you program it, all by GPS, comes back, uses multispectral imagery, and then lands back on the platform by itself. Because you have multispectral imagery, you could also make it a suicide drone, fly at 3,400 kilometers one direction. They cost $100,000 today, but the goal is $20,000. That means small states and even insurgent groups will have theater range precision weapons. Slocum glider, this understand, is not just from the air. These can spend up to 5 years at sea. They're programmable, they're GPS guided, they come back to the surface and communicate with a satellite, or you can simply send them out programmed to be a self-deploying mine or torpedo. What makes them particularly dangerous is the explosively formed projectile. We obviously ran into this in Iraq in a big way. It is much more effective than the normal shaped charge of an anti-armor because it takes that copper cone that is the slug you see, and the explosive forms it into a penetrator, solid copper penetrator. Now that used to be difficult. The Iranians had to provide them for the Iraqis because it requires precision machinery that is difficult to do in an insurgent camp. What has changed is you can now, for about $10,000, buy a 3D printer and print these as many as you want in whatever size you want. Now, are we connected to the internet here? I should have asked earlier. Nope, okay. Anyhow, I think this will be in the program. If you look at this, what you'll see is a kid who, as a hobby, decided to follow his friends who were racing dune buggies. And he gets a drone and he flies over them. But what's scary, if you've ever been in convoy and you've been looking for IEDs on the ground, suddenly the IED is above you and hunting you. He flies down the length of a convoy, pivots around, flies back, and could pick out the specific vehicle he wishes to destroy. For instance, they may decide to destroy all your fuel trucks to run you out of fuel. So that is available now. The particular drone setup this kid is flying is about $1,200. Now, I talked about weapons of mass destruction. This was the chemical accident in Bhopal, India in the 1970s. It was apparently an accident, 15,000 dead overnight, but this is part of bringing a detonator. I don't have to bring the chemicals. Your society has chemical plants somewhere in it. I have to do the research and then attack it. Now, that used to be difficult because most plants have pretty good physical security, but you're designed to stop trucks and people on the ground. Everything from 0 to 30 feet you can stop. Above that, almost no plant in the world is prepared to defend itself. This is what happens when ammonium nitrate goes off. In 1947, in a port, Texas City, a ship caught on fire and detonated. It had a load of 2,000 tons of ammonium nitrate. This is a 2-kiloton blast, equivalent to a 2-kiloton nuclear blast. What's different today is that ships come 20,000 tons. So there could be a 20,000 ton or a blast 1.5 times Hiroshima floating around out there. That's just plain fertilizer. It's nothing fancy. So what are the threats to the Middle East? I am not a Middle Eastern expert, so I'm taking a little bit of a risk here discussing this with you. But I think some of the theoretical things, the very first problem is define the problem we're dealing with. Are we dealing with an insurgency, or are we dealing with an effort at state formation? An effort by a population to change the rules that were given by the colonial powers and form a state. We see this again in Somalia. 3 states have evolved. Only 1 is recognized, but 3 states have evolved from the old colonies of Somalia. The same thing happened in Sudan and Yugoslavia. Will we see this same thing? And it'll be based on an identity of some kind, ethnic, religious, a mix of several identities. Identities are fungible as you move from problem to problem. You may identify with your clan or tribe for one problem, with your religious grouping for another, with your national grouping for another. There will be very long duration fights. When we get involved in these fights, we better start thinking a decade or 2 decades. So whatever we decide to commit to the fight, we've got to think through how do we sustain that for 2 or 3 decades. And then we've got to begin to understand this problem of converging technology. As we get 3D printing in large numbers, that small drone I showed you, the Pentagon commissioned a group at the University of Virginia. They printed a drone in 1 day. They put in a cell phone, put on a cheap electric engine and 2 batteries, and they had a fully autonomous drone that could attack a target 20 kilometers away. So with 1 printer, about a $10,000 printer, you could print 1 of these a day. Except that now there's a new technique that prints 100 times faster. So with 1 printer, a small group could be printing 100 autonomous drones a day. And that's what we've got to start thinking in terms of. How do you deal with a small group that can put 100 drones at you, a large group that could put thousands at you, and a state that could potentially put tens of thousands? And on that happy note, I'll quit. Thank you very much.
Okay, yes, thanks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to the centre. Much appreciated. And the hospitality has been overwhelming, so thank you. My question is the strategic dimensions of 4th generation warfare, tactics, techniques and procedures, or TTPs in the military parlance. So I shall endeavour to talk about these. So, whenever we look at the TTPs in 4th generation warfare, the tactics, techniques and procedures, they are all geared towards a strategic dimension. They are not meant to be just having an effect at the tactical level. Any actions as part of 4th generation warfare always think about the strategic dimension ultimately. Thus, any tactic, any bomb, any suicide attack, any drone attack, anything that happens at the tactical level, either on the battlefield or in a city like Paris or Brussels or London, these are geared towards a strategic effect rather than just having the effect down at that particular tactical level. Now, when you've got tactics working to a strategic dimension, they all have to work together. They all have to, or should, in the minds of the fourth generation warfare thinkers, work together to create synergy. That is, they are these little things that add up to more than the sum of their parts. So if they are coordinated, whatever tactical event happens, and they are working together in a synergistic way, they can have much greater effect than the sum of their parts. So some general aspects of fourth generation warfare. Fourth generation warfare is the warfare of the kind of dispossessed. People who do not have much. They are weak actors. Weak actors employ asymmetric techniques. They employ techniques that their stronger opponents cannot or will not use. And these weak actors, they will normally be targeting states or coalitions of states. This coalition aspect is an important part of fourth generation warfare, I feel, because most state actors today do not want to operate on their own in a military endeavor, in a counterinsurgency operation, in a counter-terrorist operation, whatever, without coalition partners. Any state seen to be acting on its own overseas is perceived to be acting in its own national self-interest, and that's a bad thing. So they have to work together in coalitions. Coalitions give operations legitimacy. Either the UN can give legitimacy, NATO can give legitimacy, or even a small coalition can in itself provide legitimacy for military operations against smaller actors, be they state actors or be they insurgents or terrorist groups. So when we have major powers operating today militarily, they will more often than not be acting as coalitions. The fourth generation warfare actor is actively looking for vulnerabilities in his stronger opponent. He's looking for vulnerabilities and then setting those vulnerabilities against the strength of the fourth generation warrior. An example would be that the big states don't like casualties. They don't like to see blood spilled in overseas adventures. But the fourth generation warfare can look at that as a vulnerability. How can we target that? We'll target that with suicide bombers. We show that we are prepared to die for our cause, where our stronger state adversary, these guys aren't prepared to die for their cause. That's a vulnerability set against a strength. And you'll always see this when you see fourth generation warfare actions. It's targeted at vulnerabilities and employing a strength of these weaker actors. Fourth generation warriors will employ abnormal methods. They will avoid the rules of warfare. The rules of warfare, after all, were set by the big powers. The big states liked the rules of warfare. They liked the way things were, so they set rules. This is how you fight warfare. You mustn't do this and you mustn't do this. You have to take prisoners. You have to treat them well. You can't kill civilians, or you should avoid killing civilians. All these restrictions are placed on the great states, the great powers, but the fourth generation warrior says, why should we keep to your rules? You set the rules, we'll play to our own rules. So the rules of warfare for the fourth generation warrior are something they do not want to use and make a play out of it. It's a strength of theirs that they don't keep to the rules. We've heard about it quite a bit already. The idea of using both traditional methods of warfare, but also non-traditional methods of warfare, political, social, economic, psychological, and particularly psychological warfare is employed by the fourth generation warrior. Because again, that's perceived to be a weakness of the big powers, the stronger states. They haven't got the stomach for fights. They haven't got the psychological fortitude to keep going in long wars. Whereas the fourth generation warrior says, okay, yes, we have the stamina to keep going in long wars, so let's drag this war out for a long time and see our stronger adversary suffer as the war drags on. But this aspect of bringing many modes of warfare together is very much characteristic of fourth generation warfare. I think an important point about fourth generation warfare is the way the attackers target not so much external aspects, not so much troops on the ground in Iraq or Afghanistan or Yemen or wherever, but target ultimately, in a strategic sense, what goes on inside the strong state. So the strong state is attacked often externally, but with the ultimate strategic goal of having an effect inside that state, to affect the decision makers inside that state, so that in the end the decision makers make decisions which suit the fourth generation warrior. For instance, troops leaving in Iraq or Afghanistan, a pull out of Western forces. Right? That comes from internal decisions made in the countries of the coalition forces, not externally. It comes back to this idea of long term. Fourth generation warriors are engaged in a war of attrition. Long-term struggle. Long-term struggles are perceived as weaknesses of the strong powers. The strong powers like to have short, quick, clinical wars that are over in a flash, using technology and achieving battlefield success in a few days, if not maybe weeks. But the fourth generation warrior says, okay, if these stronger powers don't like long wars, we'll stretch them out. We'll adopt measures that make sure that we can continue our struggle for a long time and gradually wear down the opponent psychologically, so that the decision makers back in the capitals of these strong states make decisions to the benefit of the fourth generation warrior. And we've talked about already about the element of using dissatisfied elements within the targeted society, the strong states society, the bigger states society. Inside that state is their biggest weakness. Not externally where they send their troops, all the kind of fancy kind of armor and technology and kind of air power and all the rest of it. The weakness comes in within the state itself, where you can find divisions which you play on. These can be political, left versus right, liberal versus kind of non-liberal, religious, sectarian, obviously a big factor here in the Middle East, ethnic minority populations, and the economically disadvantaged. Fourth generation warrior thinking carefully will find out where these particular divisions are and how these divisions can be played upon. We saw it a lot in Iraq, where Sunni and Shia would target each other's mosques to try and generate a sense of dispute between Sunni and Shia within Iraq, and that was very successful. But it's this idea of the weaker power looking for where the stronger power's vulnerabilities lie, and they often lie internally in that state. And it's also been said before that the weaker the strong state opponent is made, the more capacity the fourth generation warrior has to have some sort of influence at least. Sometimes, as in Syria, we can see where, say, Daesh, I'll come on to Daesh in a second, has the will to take over a whole state. but mostly the fourth generation warrior just wants to have more influence by weakening the state structures of his opponent. It's a zero-sum game. The weaker the state being targeted, the weaker the government of that state, the weaker the central control of that state, the more influence that any fourth generation warrior has in that state. Any military looks for where the opposing army is divided. Battalion boundaries, brigade boundaries, division boundaries, wherever things come together, there's always a weak point that can be targeted. And it's the same with coalitions. Coalitions of the willing have states which are more willing than others. And again, if, say, a group like NATO, if NATO can be targeted and its weakest elements persuaded not to fight in certain wars or not to send troops in certain locations, then NATO, in this case, is weakened. And a weakened NATO is less effective as a fighting force. It's the same with any coalition involved in counterinsurgency operations overseas, be it from NATO or any other coalition of the willing. Daesh, as I said, for instance, would like to collapse the state of Syria and thereby gain greater influence, or even take over the state itself, or become a state, or a statelet, as it already has in parts of Syria and parts of Iraq. They would like to force any interventionary operation to cease, as we've already seen in Iraq and Afghanistan, troops leaving. Although troops leaving both countries has proved more problematic than first thought. It's not easy to withdraw and leave a stable society behind. Again, fourth generation warrior is winning if the society that the coalition partners have created in Iraq and Afghanistan eventually disintegrates. So the field becomes open. The greater the weakness that the fourth generation warrior can create in an opposing stronger state, the more control they themselves have, the greater influence they themselves have. Right, some tactics and procedures. Guerrilla style, as we've heard already, hit and run, surprise, shock. Shock is a great weapon to the fourth generation warrior. Surprise is another. They need to unbalance their opponent. They need to surprise them. The stronger state opponent tries to predict where the next attack will be, for instance, but they attack in another place. Who predicted 9/11? Who said that Daesh would launch attacks on the streets of Paris, in cafes, and in theatres, in Parisian theatres, or in Brussels, indeed? These are surprises, these are shocks, these are what the fourth generation warrior loves to create, not to be predictable. We'll have obviously both military and civilian target sets, because again, the fourth generation warrior wants to have most effect, most surprise, most shock, and often the greatest shock will be by hitting civilian targets. Using extreme violence, suicide attacks, as I mentioned, again, it shows a commitment that the stronger adversary cannot match, playing with their psychology. It makes defense extremely difficult against suicide attacks, because back in the day, when I was a soldier in Northern Ireland, it was quite easy to kind of catch the terrorists because they wanted to live. Right? They would launch attacks and then run away. They could be caught. Nowadays, people launch attacks and they die. They want no escape route, which makes it very hard to provide defenses against it when these guys do not seek an escape route. They just walk up and they blow themselves up. The internal aspect, again, you want to break down the state structure of the stronger state. So you use the idea of protest, you use information warfare, including cyber warfare, to break down the social fabric of the state you are targeting. Agents provocateurs are used, people who go around inciting violence, inciting protest, inciting strikes, all kinds of measures designed to collapse the enemy state from within. From within. We have this aspect of blurring, the ambiguity, the ambiguous war aspect. Who's a combatant, who isn't? This again unbalances, it plays on the psychology of the stronger state. Are we under attack? Are we not? Are these guys bad guys? Should we arrest them? Should we not? And if we arrest them, who do we upset then? What other groups do we upset because we've arrested this group who might be perfectly innocent? Blurring. Command and control. Command and control structures are kept to a minimum by the fourth generation warrior because they become a target. The strong state loves to find these command and control centers, kill leaders, targeted assassinations to bring the whole process or the whole group to a halt. So it keeps a low profile. The group keeps a low profile and is decentralized as much as it can be. However, to create the synergistic effect, to bring everything together, you must have some sort of command center, some overall leaders who can create the synergy that is so important to bring the individual attacks together to create the greatest effect. And again, we come back to the long time period, the attrition that plays on the society you're targeting and the coalition partners you are targeting. Coalition partners, some will get tired of a war quicker than others. Once a coalition starts to break apart, what then is left? And what is left be effective as a military fighting force? Finally, just some issues. I was in Finland on Friday advising the Finnish government on Russian hybrid warfare and the methods used by the Russians in this concept of hybrid warfare, where you bring all these means of warfare together in one place. And in the case of Finland, Russia isn't using any military force as such, but it's using lots of different measures, modes of warfare to weaken the Finnish society. And it's happening in the Baltic states as well, and we've seen it before in Ukraine. So, fourth generation warfare tactics, techniques, and procedures can be used and are being used by states themselves because they feel themselves to be weak themselves. Say Russia is weak when set against NATO, so we'll use the TTPs of a weak actor. Again, often the strong state and its coalition partners will seek solace, get comfort from the fact that they have various tactical victories. You kill the leader of certain, say, of Daesh or Hezbollah or whatever. That's perceived to be a victory, but it's a tactical victory only. It doesn't equate to a winning of the war. The war goes on for a long time, and we'll have to have lots of major tactical victories to prove victorious in some of them. And finally, I want to make the point that the fourth generation warrior takes the warfare off the battlefield and puts it into many, many different battle spaces, which makes it very, very hard to target properly, to defend against properly. Because it's not just one enemy out there on a battlefield, it's lots of enemies in lots of different places doing lots of different things. And the military organization itself cannot defend, ultimately, against fourth generation warfare attacks. It takes a coalition of groups, military, internal security, societal groups, a huge gamut, a huge list of organizations have to come together in a state which feels it is under attack from fourth generation warfare kind of exponents, all have to come together. You can't just rely on the military. Thank you.
شكرا للدكاترة.
Thank you very much indeed to our speakers, and now we may open the floor for discussions. If you would like to have or to ask the speakers any question or any remarks, please, the floor is yours. In fact, I do not want to repeat myself by thanking the ECSSR, which always and has always been enriching our own experience and dealing with critical issues. I have two questions, in fact. One is directed to His Excellency the Minister, and then to Dr. Rod. And you talked about terrorism as part. I'm talking about terrorism here in this process and not about the concept of the weaponry or the use of new strategies or other things of the fourth generation. No. In fact, we've been talking about terrorism, but we have not been talking about an important subject, that is the instigators. Who are the instigators? Who are behind these modes of warfare? And of course, and if we know the instigators, it would be easy for us to solve the problem or to sort it out. And if we remember that terrorism started in Egypt, yes, in the Arab region in Egypt, and it was very active, and Egypt was alone facing terror, and but it was not supported at that time, but Egypt had its own potentials and abilities to face such difficulties. Now, I would like to refer to one important point. The Muslim brothers or Muslim brotherhoods were behind all these crimes, and they were from the very beginning who set up fundamentalist groups, terrorist groups, assassination groups, and they were limiting their activities in Egypt or confined to Egypt. But very recently we have noticed that since we have known the source of these operations, why don't we find them directly? Why don't we find those who support them and they consider them as a source of stability in the region? This is to you, Your Excellency, Mr. Rod. You talked about the long-term war confrontation, and with these terrorist groups. He's asking you in English. He's asking you in English. Do you think these strategies are working? Do you think that they are going really to end this kind of furious war?
Another thing, I want you really to elaborate on this issue, to show me, to convince me and the audience if this is right or wrong. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. You talked about terror and terrorism, and we cannot connect terrorism with Islam. And if we go back to Islam, it's a religion of tolerance. It has nothing to do with terror. But there are certain organizations and certain individuals who disguised under the clothes of Islam. They were politically motivated and economically motivated, but they took Islam as a slogan. And these groups were known, yes, very early in Egypt and the region, and they were also fought, but they had their own influence and they have their own strategies and spread their own doctrines and their own ideologies in the region, and of course they made use of the circumstances. But to eradicate this group in a country, it might be possible, but you cannot end or eradicate the sleeping cells in many countries, and there are some influences, some advantages, some interests, and they have their own strategies that they have been working on. on. I think that eradicating them in one place, it's possible. At a certain time, it's possible. But we cannot eradicate them in different places all over the world because they are having their own ideologies, and these ideologies have been used and they use the modern technologies and the social media in spreading their doctrines, and I think everybody knows about these facts. It might be known, it might not be known, but if it is known, they might be eradicated or finalized. But there are certain individuals and certain groups that are still working underground, and they spread doctrines and their own principles, but they are not well known or known nowadays. We might know them in the future, and we might discover them in the future, and once they are discovered, they will be dealt with, of course, accordingly. Thank you. Dr. Rod, if you have any response.
Yeah, we always come back to the problem. When we're fighting terrorism, what is a terrorist? We always go back to the phrase, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And wherever we happen to be in the world, our positions are different. Well, I talked about the IRA, the Irish terrorists that Britain had for a long time. But many people in the United States didn't perceive them to be terrorists, and they got some help from the United States. Not officially, not from the government, but from people in the United States. So even then, you have Britain and the United States, which are very close allies and have been for a long time, disagreeing ultimately on who a terrorist is. Are they freedom fighters? Are they really bad guys spreading terror? We also have to go back to the point that the original terrorists was a state itself, the French revolutionary state of the 18th century. That La Terreur was spread by the French government to bring people into order in that particular state. So the original terrorist was a state itself. So when we have these problems with defining terrorism, saying who's a terrorist, we always run into the problem of, oh, but are these guys bad guys or are they the good guys? So wherever you happen to be in the world, you'll get differences of opinion. And that's then very hard to bring coalitions to fight the terrorists, wherever they happen to be. So this is the main problem and always will be. How do you tell a terrorist from a freedom fighter?
I hope that we have answered your questions. I hope I have answered your questions. Okay. Yes, Major General. Through the discussions of the fourth generation warfare and putting it within the framework of analysis and discussion, we certainly do not have differences, and we agree upon the concepts and the ideas, but the question here is about these groups or non-state actors that represent the fourth generation warriors, and they started and began to work under different conditions for different reasons, and their own beginnings, according to in different times and different dates, of course, differed from their own beginnings and their own ends, in fact, and due to the instigation and encouragement of some countries and some states and governments that supported them, and some of them came out of the conditions in some national states, and therefore they started to fight according to this new generation for political objectives and political reasons, and for even ideological reasons and social backgrounds and social objectives. However, The question is about these, after knowing all these direct reasons of their own existence, the existence of such fundamental and terrorist groups and non-state actors of the fourth generation warriors, it became evident today that they are run in proxy wars. In fact, if you agree with me, they work in proxy wars, and they have been used in proxy wars for political, economic or social reasons, and they started like that, and now they are tools in the hands of others, in the hands of states or superpowers that provide political support, media support and economic support for their own by proxy wars in different regions. So I think that if there is a kind of a will in the international community to cooperate and to agree on this point in order not to fight fight these groups and to dry their own financial resources, and also to dry and to exhaust their own political support that start their own wars by proxy. In fact, they left their own original reasons of their own creation, and now they are fighting as tools in the market of warfare, which in the warfare, fourth generation warfare market. Thank you. Thank you, Major General, for this question. In fact, and we've been talking about these terrorist groups, and we said they are not part of the fourth generation. They are part of it, and the fourth generation is a hybrid or a mixture of these non-state actors and others, in fact. And as you said, that they are now fighting by proxy or on behalf of others. In fact, it's true, but there are certain reasons that serve the interests of these nations that support terror, and they serve the policies and interests of these nations, and in certain regions of the Middle East or the world at large, in order to implement their own policies and to spread their own ideologies and to control the political and economic regimes. Yes, we do agree with you on this terminology, that these organizations fight by proxy on behalf of others. Yes, we agree with you.
I'm going to take the risk and disagree here. It's a good question, sir, but not all of these groups are proxies. Many of them, for instance, the Kurds that are fighting the Turks, I don't see a state behind that. The Uyghurs fighting the Chinese, I don't see a state behind. There are a lot of groups in the world that are sourced from their own reasons, own internal identity. So again, the key comes back to the political, economic, and social conditions of the country and the fight, and any external actors. And I think that's what you've got to understand. You can't assume they're all externally driven. I don't think initially the Iraqi resistance, and certainly not the Afghan resistance to the US, was in any way sourced from outside. It was supported once the insurgency started, then Iran stepped in and supported. But initially, this was Iraqis who were mad that the United States was in their country.
Yes, I'd like to add another point here. In order to protect communities and societies where you find such non-state actors, or those who I think that the prevention and protection must come from within, from a stable, socially and economically stable society, good education, advanced education that serves the objectives or strategic objectives of the state. I think this is a kind of prevention against this disease, against the use of your community against yourself and by other terrorist groups. نعم، نقطة سريعة هنا.
Major factors that we are talking about fourth generation warfare today is because independent weak actors can themselves operate on a major world level, because they have the technologies to do information warfare, they have the weapons, there are far more weapons around these days than there ever were. You can make explosives very easily using information from the internet. The internet is a great guide, teacher, that allows small groups not to need external advice or trainers, but to do it from themselves from the internet. So all these factors, I think, come together today in the modern world to allow fourth generation warfare warriors to operate without another state behind them. So I think they can be independent of any major state backer.
Any other question? Please. In the name of Allah, Dr. Fawzi Hassan, my question is to you, Mr. Ali. This theory, the theory of warfare, is in a state of progress, and today we are facing the fourth generation warfare. On the other hand, we need to develop a strategy to adapt ourselves to this kind of warfare in the region, specifically that we have a very strange approach and unique approach. The country, which is now being attacked by the others, according to new generation, is also attaching or attacking others. So this is a new dimension. It attacks and being attacked. Now, what is the suitable adaptive approach or strategy in order to cope with the developments of the fourth generation warfare, and what is the preventive and immunitive approach as a kind of preemption to face such a war? Thank you very much for your question. And in fact, the strategy to face these terrorist groups may be divided into two parts: a military and a cultural, social approach in the countries affected by these wars. And the military, of course, means that each state should train its own defenses and its own security forces, provide them with the most advanced and updated weapons. And the other one is the preventive approach, that is the protection. You should have cultural, educational, social and awareness programs with excellent educational outputs, and to control the media in one way or another and direct it in the right path, and to the exchange of intelligence at the international level, and is a vital factor in fighting such groups and eradicating them. Thank you. Dr. Reddy, would like to add something?
Yes, I'd just like to say that the way forward is two things. I mean, diplomatically, people have to agree who the enemy is and then take action against them as a cooperative group, rather than having people not agreeing who the enemy is. The second point is again, to repeat, it comes back to dissatisfaction. If people are not dissatisfied, they will perceive no need to become fourth generation warriors. Now, how you get rid of dissatisfaction is a very great question. You might start with trying to get rid of unemployment, but that's a major factor. It's never really going to happen. But this is one of the problems, unemployment in this particular region of the world, the Middle East. If people do not have secure jobs, if they do not have a stake in a society, then the risk is that they become terrorists, insurgents, warriors against the system, because the system, they think, has let them down. But these are big questions, and these are big solutions, and they're not easy to produce.
Now we may take only 2 questions for shortage of time. If you have any comment here, any inquiry, any question, please. I'd like to thank the speakers and the audience for their presentations and for their invaluable ideas, in fact. And just to call things and describe things as they are, in fact, and let us be frank about the danger of the Muslim Brotherhood and the dangers of Hezbollah. In history, we see that the presence of these two movements in the region and their own historical extension in the region was used or exploited to, in the light of the instability that resulted from what is called the Arab Spring, and they exploited the repercussions of the Arab Spring using the terrorist groups and insurgents and the fundamentalist violent groups, and thus they revealed their own real faces within the last 5 years. So, some participants must put their fingers on things and must call things by their own names, and some international experts are or they see our own concepts at the international level, but we talk about the Middle East level, and in the region we have these two movements, I mean the Muslim Brotherhoods and the Hezbollah, that reveal their faces, destructive elements in their own presence, as the speakers mentioned in their own presentations, that this support that these groups or these two groups receive, I mean Muslim Brotherhood or the Hezbollah, this support that they get is also a threat, is also a danger, and the support is danger, whether political support, financial support, constitute a danger to the region, a huge danger, and then we have to think of how to face it. And if they presented themselves at the beginning as freedom fighters, by which they deceived us in the past, now it turned out that they are not like that, and these masks must be removed, and false masks must be removed from these faces and from these movements, and we have to tell our nations about their own identities, about their own characters, about their own people in a scientific way. And I hope that we concentrate in our discussions on such a kind of movements and how do they jump into the scene, and using the fourth generation warfare at this period, and how are we going to face them in the foreseeable future. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Your Highness. This is only a comment, no questions. Thank you. This is only a comment, no questions. Thank you, Your Highness. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, I'm Amar Kadi from the Dominican Republic. We were talking about all this avoidance of engaging on regular war rules, and that the 4G warriors are not willing to. My question is about political correctness. Is that those countries that cannot defend themselves against 4th-generation warriors are being too politically correct? Because sometimes when we see like attacks happening in Paris, that in few days they know who are the culprits, and the history that they were in Syria fighting for Daesh, and then they know that they were in Brussels. But the question is, why don't they arrest them before that based on surveillance, and why they let them, or I don't know, arrest them after an attack happens? Is it too political correctness that is not letting powers act against for warriors, for generation warriors? Thank you.
I would say no. One of the problems, this is actually a big issue in the United States in our presidential campaign. Political correctness depends upon where you sit. We have some people, not very bright people, in the United States who claim all Muslims are a danger. There's breathtaking stupidity in that argument. But if you follow it and say you arrest based on political correctness, then if those people, that party should get elected, then what would happen? It would be a disaster for the United States. I don't think it is political correctness that stops them. It is rule of law. In each nation you have rule of law and certain rules you have to follow before you can arrest someone. And it's very important to maintain that even in the face of terror. Because what terror is trying to do is break down your belief in your own organization. And if rule of law starts to break down, then people start to distrust it. And that erodes the foundation of your society. I think the British handled it very, very well with the IRA. They didn't violate the rule of law, well, some in Northern Ireland, but not a great deal. And they understood that that would mean they would suffer some attacks, but they were willing to take the attacks to preserve their way of life rather than try to do preemptive things that were against the law.
Yeah, just a very quick point about, it does come back to the rule of law, that the law has to be seen to be operating against all communities in the same way. And if any clampdown appears to be anti-Muslim, as it might be in Brussels or it might be in Paris or in London, then it likely will make the situation worse and not better. So the security authorities have to tread a very careful line between stopping terrorism but maintaining the rule of law, which is more important. Historically, whenever in counterinsurgency campaigns, the forces of the state have not kept to the rule of law, they've made the situation worse. The British did this back in 1972 with the use of the parachute regiment, killing people. That made the situation a lot worse in Northern Ireland. In Algeria, back in 1956, the French army went into Algiers city to impose what they saw as a rule of law, but used too much force, and then made the situation in Algeria much worse. When you go beyond the rule of law, you often make the situation worse and not better.
شكرا. أعتقد أن
Thank you very much. I think our time is over and we don't have any time more. Finally, we'd like to emphasize once again that each country, in order to get prepared to deter any attack and contain an attack, expected and to use the most suitable technologies and techniques to defend itself and its own nations, and therefore they have to understand the following. First of all, what happened in the past, the far past and the present, and what happens nowadays, and what are the forces and disputes that will have effect on the present situation and the developments politically, economically, socially, media, and militarily. What is the best approach to face these crises and warfares, and how to prepare in the field of weapons and to reduce the predictions of the new actors and the non-state actors, and how to face them and how to challenge them with the possible means. Thank you very much indeed for your attention and your participation. And now we come to the end of the second session. Thank you, Your Highness, for your presence and your participation. Thank you very much indeed.
في أعمال الجلسة الأولى، والآن نأخذ استراحة قصيرة لمدة 10 دقائق، نعود بعدها مع الجلسة الثانية، وشكرا.